up, all my fight fans? So, you got UFC, I believe it's 295, not too far away. You got MSG, not too far away. You got Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic for the heavyweight championship of the world, not too far away. And turns out there is a backup fighter announced for that fight, and that just so happens to be Sergey Pavlovich. The scary individual Sergey. The nuclear bomb in his hand Sergey is who I'm talking about. He is going to be the backup fighter in case someone pulls out of that fight with Jon Jones or Stipe Miocic. One of those fighters pull out, he is definitely going to be, he is now stated to be your backup fighter. What do we think about that, guys? Sergey Pavlovich is a scary individual, scary fighter. He is on a winning streak of 6 fights in a row, 6 TKO KOs in a row. A combined total of all those fights together is somewhere in between 12 to 11 minutes. He has knocked out guys like Derek Lewis, Tai Tuivasa, Curtis Blades, and quite a few other contenders in the heavyweight division. His last loss is against Alistair Overeem, which again, Alistair Overeem was no punk, but it was the beginning stages of Sergey's career. So I would definitely like to see that rematch take place, but we know Alistair Overeem is no longer with the UFC, and definitely no longer looks like he can even make heavyweight at this moment. He looks like he's been cutting some weight, cutting some pounds. Hopefully everything's all good with Alistair Overeem. But moving on, he is now your backup fighter for UFC 295, I believe it is. Guys, I mean, I do feel like Jon Jones and Stipe is going to take place. I don't necessarily see any of these guys falling out. Stipe and Jon Jones aren't necessarily known for pulling out of fights. We do know there was that one incident that did take place back in the day. I can't remember exactly what the date or what the pay-per-view was, but I do remember that it was Jon Jones versus Dan Henderson. Dan Henderson, I believe, pulled out with an injury or something to that nature, and the replacement was going to be Chael Sonnen. Jon Jones pulled out of that because he did not want to take on a fighter like Chael Sonnen on a week's notice. Now that's Chael Sonnen, who was a decent fighter. Definitely wasn't nowhere near the level of Jon Jones, but decent still nonetheless. And Jon Jones pulled out of that one. I strongly feel that Jon Jones is not going to necessarily want to take on Sergey Pavlovich, a guy who is well known for his hands and his power, on a week's notice if Stipe pulls out. That's one. I feel like Stipe might be, on the other hand, quite on that same road. Like, hey, maybe it's not the smartest thing because Jon Jones is the big payday. Jon Jones is the big prize. You know, and if I go against Sergey and I get knocked out, I'm not getting that again. So I do feel like it's almost like a loss for Sergey, because I don't necessarily feel like he is going to be anybody's replacement, because I don't feel like anybody's going to pull out. And if anybody does, I don't see anybody fighting Sergey Pavlovich, because he is literally that scary. He is literally that powerful. He is literally that strong. I think I would be more excited for a Francis versus Sergey Pavlovich than I would be for a Jon Jones and Francis. Not because of the fighting styles and because of the names, but because of the kind of war these guys would have throwing bombs with each other. Because of the interest, I'll be like, oh my God, I want to see the curiosity that it gives me. Like, you know, we had that somewhat with the Derek Lewis and Francis, but it did not, you know, turn out to be what we all thought it would be. So I feel like this fight would be much different, but we already know that's not going to happen. We know Francis is in a different organization, so no point in talking about that. That's just where I feel with that. And of course, we all know still the biggest heavyweight fight, or biggest fight ever, would be Jon Jones versus Francis. But moving on. Sergey, I think his last fight was against Curtis Blades. Can't remember exactly when that time frame was, but at the end of the day, he looks like to be the #1 contender for the winner of Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic. Again, I mentioned previously, I do not know if this is going to be the retirement fight for John Jones and the retirement fight for Stipe. But I do feel strongly that Sergey is going to be your #1 contender and fighting for the title in his next fight. It just depends on who. Now, as far as him stepping in, I strongly don't feel like that's going to happen. I feel like these guys want to prepare for somebody that is as much of a monster like Sergey is. So, guys, let me know in the comments if you think I am right. Do you think these guys are going to fight Sergey if he just so happens to be, you know, called upon when if or when one of the fighters pulls out? Or they're going to just completely notch the whole pay-per-view, well, not pay-per-view, but the heavyweight title fight, and say, you know what, nope, I'm not going to go against that guy on short notice. Let me know in the comments, guys. Like, subscribe, hit that notification button, and I'll see you guys in the next video.